the Council to use social media, provided that this does not disturb the business of the meeting. I would like to welcome members of the public in attendance, and it's a pleasure to have you here. I wanted to remind you that this meeting is being webcast live, although I have the right to suspend filming if the need arises. So moving straight to item 1, apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Peter Santo, John Beckett, Marsha Mosley, Amanda Boot, Rose Thorne, Graham Elwood, Fiona White and Victoria Young. Any others? John Fury, thank you. Okay. Councillor Withers, thank you. Thank you. Moving to item 2, minutes on page 11 of the agenda. May I sign the minutes of the Council held on 9th July 2019 as a correct record of the meeting? Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests, significant personal interests or prejudicial interests that members wish to make at this point? Dr. Povey.
Declare an interest as a trustee of Surrey Hills Society.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Item 4, Chairman's announcements. As always, I put my announcements to save some time in the book, but I'd like in particular to welcome Paul Evans today. He's the new Director of Law and Governance and the Monitoring Officer. Welcome, Paul, to your first Council meeting. And on behalf of the Council, I would particularly like to thank Jeff Wild for his work while he was here as Monitoring Officer. I've known Jeff for 20-25 years in and out of public sector, and I wish him very good luck when he goes to the Isle of Wight. Item 5, public petition, which we'll now consider regarding fire appliances in Surrey, which received 13,048 signatures via the Council's e-petition facility. The petition states, "We, the undersigned, petition Surrey County Council to demand Surrey County Council scrap their plans to leave 7 major appliances uncrewed at night." And Mr. Lee Belston, on behalf of Mr. Paul Couchman, from the Fire Brigades Union and Save Our Services in Surrey, has 5 minutes to present the petition. Mr. Belston, would you kindly take the stand?
Is this working? Yeah, cool. Thank you. Okay. The reason I'm here today is to present the petition submitted on behalf of Surrey Fire Brigades Union and Save Our Services in Surrey, whom I represent over 90% of the entire uniformed workforce in Surrey Fire and Rescue Service. I thank the leader and the members for giving me the opportunity, Secretary for the Fire Brigades Union in Surrey, the opportunity to present myself before you. For those of you that are unaware, this petition has gathered 13,050 signatures, for which the first time in over 10 years a petition has achieved the 10,000 mark. Therefore, it can be debated at full council here today. I'd like to get some concerns addressed from the Cabinet meeting that took place on the 24th of September and add some key points for consideration. During that meeting, it was very obvious that Councillor Denise Turner-Stewart was very dismissive towards the petition, and I was staggered how quickly it's thrown to one side with no apparent regard to the thousands of residents, many of whom Councillor Turner-Stewart represents locally, had put their names down in support to demand that the Surrey County Council scrap their plans to leave 7 major appliances uncrewed at night. Therefore, could she please explain what she means by the petition has a narrow focus and therefore out of context with any mitigation set out in the plan? Because as I see it, the narrow focus is simply related to question 6 in the consultation survey. Why ask a question which will generate people's thoughts and reactions, but then dismiss and completely disregard them by saying they are out of context? With regards to the consultation survey, out of 1,687 respondents, 1,146 of these completely disagreed to question 6, which was the question and point that Councillor Robert Evans had tried to get an answer for. It appeared as though there was an intentional avoidance to give the answer to Councillor Evans' question, and offer a completely different answer that would suggest there was support for all of the proposals. So for clarity, question 6. To what extent do you disagree or agree with the Surrey Fire and Rescue Service maintaining the number of fire stations and fire engines in Surrey, but changing how Banstead, Camberley, Egham, Fallbridge, Guildford, Hazelmere, Painshill, Walton and Woking are crewed at night? 18%, just 18% of respondents agreed to this question. And it seems the majority of responses saw through the intentional and misleading way in how this question was worded. So, are you listening to your constituents, your residents, because they have told you what they want? Your firefighters, their representatives, their families, friends, members of the public are dismayed by the response from our leaders at County Hall and within the fire service that state they're able to mitigate any increased risk by throwing up more smoke alarms and then relying on the on-call fire engines and their firefighters. Please note, not one on-call fire engine is able to consistently achieve the response standard that Councillor Turner-Stewart repeated twice to Councillor Jonathan Essex's question about the increased risk at that meeting. It was quoted, "We will continue to meet and maintain our response standard." The current average across all on-call fire stations right now is 49%. Surrey's on-call capability is only able to demonstrate 49% average to a targeted response standard that must be able to achieve an 80% mark. And this is only an improvement from 47% for the period of 2016 to 2018. I'm sure you're aware of why these figures are so low. It's because on-call firefighters are mainly mobilised from their homes and sometimes from their primary employment. It can take between 6 and 8 minutes for them to get to their stations before they are then deployed to wherever they needed. So if 7 whole-time fire engines are removed at night, there will be an increased emphasis to utilise our on-call colleagues more and more, which will undoubtedly add further strain and stress loads that have already been felt amongst that section of the workforce, but will add further delays to when the residents of Surrey actually get a response. This is a standard that Surrey Fire and Rescue has never been able to achieve consistently since it was downgraded in 2011. Across the county, Surrey averages a 75% response standard, and that is with the current 20 whole-time fire engines, the 2 variably crewed fire engines from Monday to Friday, and up to, and I say loosely, 10 on-call fire engines. Surrey cannot meet, and therefore cannot maintain, the standard with the resources it's currently got. So it's absolutely preposterous to suggest any response standard will improve and be better than what is currently demonstrating, with 7 less fire engines that are crewed 24/7, 365. I urge this council and the members here to debate and reconsider, then reassess the changes to the crewing of the fire engines at night in all those locations. They need to task Surrey Fire and Rescue to consistently demonstrate and prove they're able to achieve their set response standard, and then be able to recruit and retain the on-call firefighters before any changes to the frontline responses are made. If what the council has stated repeatedly is true, then these changes are not financially driven. Therefore, wouldn't it be the safest option for all if Surrey Fire and Rescue Service demonstrated its effectiveness first and foremost, then allow the scrutineers to present further judgment later down the line? Councillors, parts of these plans have their merits. But honestly, hands on your hearts, ask yourselves, will the removal of 7 fire engines make Surrey safer? Because the people you represent have repeatedly stated it will not. And a clear and overwhelming majority of the professional firefighters we represent state it will not. This downgrade of frontline fire cover is not safe and will cause significant suffering for all. Please reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bilson. I call Ms. Denise Turner-Stewart to reply.
Thank you, Chairman, and I would like to thank Mr Belston and Mr Couchman for presenting their petition. Following many months of diligent and detailed work by the cross-party Fire Transformation Working Group and the Communities, Environment and Highways Select Committee, the Making Surrey Safer Plan, our Integrated Risk Management Plan, was reviewed and approved by Cabinet. This petition focuses on a small part of the plan and is out of context. Significantly, it does not take into account the substantial increase in community and business safety activities to protect residents and businesses, which we know saves lives. As the Fire Authority for Surrey, we are required by law to produce an integrated risk management plan by the Fire and Rescue Framework for England. Our last IRMP was published in 2016. Since 2016, the risks across Surrey have changed significantly and continue to change. 3,452 miles of road carry almost double the national average of traffic. 64,000 homes are at risk from flooding from the Wey, the Mole and the Thames. Surrey has an ageing population with over 85,000 residents over 65 and living alone. This figure is to rise by 34% by 2030. As more vulnerable people are supported to live at home for longer, the risks increase with time. People with mobility issues may find it harder to self-rescue and may suffer from slips or falls. The number of people with drug and alcohol dependency is rising. 85,000 premises in Surrey are covered by fire safety legislation that Surrey Fire and Rescue Service enforces. This includes care homes occupied by some of Surrey's most vulnerable residents. All of the identified and evolving risks are set out in the community risk profile based on 5 years of existing and 10 years of predictive data, which has been thoroughly and externally verified. The service has taken a highly rigorous approach to the analysis of the data to ensure the accuracy of the modelling for the proposals in the Making Surrey Safer plan. The National Fire Chiefs Council have provided oversight with an assurance panel including representatives from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, the Local Government Association, SIPFA and our neighbouring Chief Fire Officers. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Services were provided with our plan during a recent revisit, the results of which will be published shortly. In the autumn of 2018, in supporting Surrey Fire and Rescue Service, Surrey County Council removed £6 million of savings targets following the appointment of our Chief Fire Officer, Steve Owen Hughes. The service was to remodel, to modernise, to address the immediate and evolving risks in Surrey and to address the findings of the 2018 HMIC FRS inspection and deliver urgently needed prevention and protection work and meet legislation and recommendations following the Grenfell tragedy. In order to fully support transformation, approximately £1 million of additional funding was also provided by Surrey County Council. We held a public consultation from 12 weeks from the 4th of March to the 26th of May, during which around 1,800 responses were received, and the feedback was broadly supportive of our proposals. Our plan sets out how we will change the structure of the service to deliver essential life-saving outcomes through a significant uplift in prevention and protection work in all of our communities across Surrey. We will maintain and meet our response standard of the first appliance within 10 minutes and the second arriving within 15 minutes 80% of the time. We will shift capacity from the night time when we experience fewer incidents and travelling around can be faster to the daytime so that our staff can carry out vital life-saving prevention work. We will maintain all of our fire stations. We will increase crew availability at Hazelmere and Walton to manage wildfire and rescue incidents. We are changing cover at Camberley, Forbridge, Guildford and Woking stations, where there will be one appliance at night instead of two, and Egham, Banstead and Paynes Hill, where cover will come from a neighbouring station. This is a realignment of our resources to manage the risks in Surrey, which are greater in the daytime, and to enable delivery of our life-saving prevention work in our schools, colleges, homes and businesses. We will increase our number of on-call firefighters by enlarging the qualifying catchment area and making the role more attractive and accessible. We will charge for some incidents, for example false fire alarms and animal rescues, while working with businesses and owners to avoid the need to attend and charge. These changes reflect the fact that our response model is currently inefficient, with a surplus capacity at night. Our detailed and externally validated modelling shows that we need 20 fire engines in the day and 16 at night. We will have 25 in the day, 30 on the weekend days, and 23 at night. We have built-in resilience to allow for training and protracted incidents. Since the 1st of March, we have invested in and adopted new work practices which have improved daytime responses by 50 to 64 seconds and nighttime responses by 55 to 88 seconds. Additional current technology currently being rolled out will continue to improve response times. We've recruited 82 new firefighters since September 2018, and we continue to recruit full-time and on-call firefighters. Surrey Fire and Rescue Service has some of the most advanced equipment in the UK, and our firefighters continue to be some of the most highly trained and skilled.
Could you conclude now, please, Ms Turner-Stewart?
We are extremely proud of the fire service for the exemplary work that our firefighters undertake on behalf of the residents of Surrey, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our crews are constantly moving around the county so that they are best placed to respond to emergencies, and these changes will keep our people safe by having a fire and rescue service fit for today and for the future. We will always send our most appropriate, quickest response to you wherever you are in the county. And our commitment to you is that we will continuously work with, invest in and support Surrey Fire and Rescue Service to keep you, our residents, safe. The recommendation is as set out and tabled, that the Council notes that Cabinet approved the Making Surrey Safer plan and that members will continue working with the Fire and Rescue Service during its implementation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members? Mr Evans.
Thank you very much, Chair. Colleagues, I've listened very carefully to our representative from the Fire Brigades Union and to Councillor Denise Turner-Stewart. I also attended the Cabinet meeting when it was put to Cabinet. The document that we're talking about is called Making Surrey Safer. And I put it to you that we cannot be making Surrey safer if we are reducing the amount of fire cover that is provided for the people of Surrey. I accept, and everyone agrees that we should be providing more information, public health and safety information, and I welcome that. Of course we should be telling people how to avoid fires in their homes. Councillor Denise Turner-Stewart said the consultation was broadly supportive of it. But people I've spoken to, and I've come across nobody anywhere in Surrey who wants the number of fire engines, fire crews reduced, or who believes that their fire service should be part-time rather than full-time. And we rely on our fire service, everyone does, and there have been major fires and deaths in Spelthorne, the area that I represent. I'm not suggesting that the changes have necessarily contributed to those, because there's still the inquiries to take place. But we've heard from our visitor today that Surrey cannot meet its response times with its current resources, so why on earth are we considering 7 fewer fire engines at night time? If it's not financially driven, then we should be, to my mind, we should be listening to the professionals, the firefighters, those who go out and fight fires or rescue people from cars or rivers or in other emergencies. We shouldn't be reducing the resources. We've heard that fire stations may be closed and cover will be provided from another fire station. We all know, whether we're experienced in firefighting or not, that the response time is important. And if you increase the response time after an emergency, to my mind, you will inevitably increase the risks to the damage to property and ultimately lives. And I put it to you, colleagues, today, you cannot, in all honesty, support a document that is described as making Surrey safer when you've heard from the people who are actually doing the work that this would have the opposite effect, would not be making Surrey safer. I urge you to support the petitioners and oppose the Cabinet motion as discussed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr Spence.
Thank you, Chair. I've read all the paperwork as carefully as I can, and I don't hold myself up as an expert on fire matters. And I think that's a problem, because I don't think, to be honest, any of us in this chamber are experts on fire matters. Even I, as a fire warden at my own work, do that at a volunteer capacity. And what I was interested in the documentation were the submissions given by either active firefighters or recently retired firefighters. And one of the things that stuck with me was, okay, if you do all the prevention work, and that's tremendous, and the money going into prevention is fantastic, and I support that. If that goes from 5 fires to 1 fire, when the 1 fire happens that hasn't been prevented, it's important with the number of crews that turn up, and it seems to be 2 is optimal rather than 1, and it seems to have 5 firefighters in each van rather than 4 is important in terms of when they can enter the building. And I know from my work as a fire warden, to enter a building at the right moment before the fire has really taken off is important. And I wouldn't want to see 4 people sitting in a van having to debate on the radio or a mobile with others whether or not they should enter the building, whereas 5 can enter the building straight away. So my view is that whilst there is much in this that's been looked at very carefully, when I have to make the final decision, I will default to the view of the professionals. And the professionals are the firefighters of this county. And if they say to me that reducing 7 appliances at night is not making Surrey safer, then my view is that opinion overwhelms other opinions, and that is the opinion that I would listen to. So therefore I intend to vote against the recommendation, not on the grounds that I don't want to note it, but it's the only mechanism that I've got to show my support for the petition.
Thank you. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thank you, Chairman, very much. The first thing that does need to be said is that nobody in this council, Denise Turner-Stewart, anybody else, treats with dismissal the fears that have been expressed. We respect them and we will try to answer them. And we understand, obviously, that there are fears for the future, and it is our collective job to make those fears not happen. But, Chairman, there's another fear, and that's the current fear we have of the existing service. I mean, the Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire Rescue Service report that was issued, I think, at the end of last year has been prayed in aid, but I think it's the first time I'm going to quote from it. Nobody's actually quoted from it. So I'm going to it's a short quote, but it encapsulates the dilemma and the choices that this council has to make. Their very first sentence: we have concerns about the performance of Surrey Fire and Rescue Service in keeping people safe and secure. This is the present regime. In particular, we have serious concerns about the service's effectiveness and efficiency. The service is inefficient at keeping people safe from fires and other risks. This is particularly so in how it uses its resources. And that is the basis. Moving on from that indictment from the Inspectorate as to why the proposals that have been put forward, have sent out to consultation, gone through various stages, and now reached this council, have been taken forward. And, Chairman, it's even more significant than that in many respects if we're talking about the democratic input into this process. As Mrs. Turner-Stewart said right at the beginning of her comments, this issue has been amongst members, some of whom the public have attended, some of which have been taken not so much in private. The scrutiny by which this process has taken place has been formidable. A task group set up 5-6 months ago under Mr. Hussein's chairmanship, all party membership. There's not a Tory stitch-up. Liberal Democrat members were there, Residents Association members were there, Conservative members were there. It produced a unanimous report. A unanimous report. And the focus of that, making Surrey safer, was the need to increase the complement of our firefighting, fire and rescue team. That is the serious deficiency, the culpable deficiency for the last 8 years, has been the decline in the number of firefighters and their team since 2011. I think the numbers are down by about a third from what they were. That is shocking, and that is why one central element of the plan is to recruit significant numbers to the team. And the task group, I will stop in a minute because I see the yellow light, and I will obey the yellow light, is that the recruitment of our fire service team will be on schedule, absolutely done, by 2020. And my final point, Chairman, is that, in a sense, the most important of all. We will monitor performance rigorously, robustly. If there's any sign that these targets are not being met, then this must be reviewed. But I hope, and I'm reasonably confident, that the plan here will do what it says it will do, which is to make Surrey safer.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Essex.
Thank you. I like some parts of this plan. I mean, the government, they said that, the prevention of fire in this county is not up to government standards. We need to bring that up to the right level. What's happened, cuts in public services have cut things like prevention far, far harder than what we do afterwards. We've cut public health more than drugs. We've cut road safety more than road resurfacing. And we've cut these fire prevention visits, or maybe we never had them in the first place. I don't know which variant it was, but that's good that we're getting up to the national standard. But I don't accept that that's an excuse for removing fire engines. We've heard different facts from Councillor Denise Turner-Stewart and from the fire service. In the past, are we 49% on target, an average 75% response standard, or is it okay because we're 50 to 80 seconds better? But either way, that looks like we're looking back to where we are already. That's the baseline, and we can argue about whether the baseline is good or bad. What it seems is this proposal would increase the time it takes for the average fire engine in Surrey to get to the average fire. And we have to assess whether we're happy with that risk or not. The average cost Surrey in this report says 30 seconds. In some areas it's as high as 2 minutes. What would that mean? I imagine that will mean that some fires, rather than being constrained to one room in a house, may burn a house. It may mean that the risk, the individual getting out of the house, is greater. If the reason we go to fires is to put them out, to save lives and reduce damage, then arriving later is likely to risk lives and risk greater damage. I would like that to be quantified. We've heard about road safety, drugs and alcohol, flooding. Yes, I accept those are also risks. But just like fire, our prevention in those areas has also been cut. I don't think we should trade one off against the other. We need to make sure we stop risks as early as we can, pre-disaster if you like, but we have sufficient response. So, okay, if we were to take that approach, let's see where we are. We've said this isn't a cut, but it's saving £2 million. So what I would ask is this. If you have £2 million spare after making these changes, where are you going to spend it? Is it ring-fenced to reduce risk in Surrey? Are we going to spend it on increasing the resilience of those 7 fire crews we're going to cut? Maybe reviewing to leave a couple of them in place if we've got that money spare. Or are we going to have an extra 2 million on road safety spending, level crossings? Or are we going to have an extra 2 million in our public health budget? But what I don't accept is to somehow pretend this isn't a cut. It is. A little bit of prevention, quite a bit more risk. What's the balance? I've asked Denise Turner-Stewart in the Cabinet meeting to provide figures. I'm still waiting. So on that basis, I can't support this.
Thank you, Mr. Essex. So the recommendation is within the Cabinet member response to the petition, and I'll now put this to the vote. Mr. Evans.
Chair, I wonder if we could have a named vote on this, please.
Vote and hands and proper votes. We'll have a hand vote and press the button vote. Thank you. So, all in favour of the recommendation? I'm informed that you are entitled, and so you shall, Mr. Evans. Thank you. Mr. Evans, I've said that I'll accept it even though you haven't got 10, so that's fine. So we'll pause 1 second while we get ready for the recorded vote. Thank you.
So I will now start the named vote. Those in favour of the recommendation within the response to the petition from the Cabinet member. So I'm looking for your support or not. Mrs. Angel. Mrs. Add. Mrs. Barton. Absent. Mr. Beckett. Mr. Benison. Miss Boot is absent. Mr. Botton. Mrs. Bowes. Mrs. Bramall. Mr. Brett Warburton. Mr. Carrasco. Dr. Chapman. Mrs. Clack. Mr. Cooksey. Mrs. Curran. Mr. Darby. Mr. Deach. Mr. Elwood. Mr. Essex. Mr. Robert Evans. Mr. Tim Evans. Mr. Few. Mr. Forster. Mr. Fury is absent. Mr. Furness. Mr. Gardner. Mr. Goodman. Mr. Goodwin. Mrs. Goodwin. Miss Griffiths is absent. Dr. Grant Duff. Mr. Galati. Mr. Hall. Mrs. Hammond. Mr. Harmer. Mr. Harris. Mr. Harrison. Mr. Hawkins. Miss Heath, Mr. Hussain. Mrs. Isles. Mr. Islam. Mr. Kemp. Mr. Kington. Mr. Knight. Rachel Lake. Mrs. Lay. Mr. Lee. Mrs. Lewis. Mr. MacLeod. Mr. McIntosh. Mr. Mallet. Mr. Mansfield. Mr. Martin. Mrs. Mason. Mrs. Mooney. Miss Morley. Mrs. Mosley. Mrs. Mountain. Mrs. Muir. Mr. Newty. Mr. Oliver. Mr. O'Reilly. Dr. Povey. Mr. Ramsdale. Mrs. Rivers. Absent. Mrs. Rush. Absent. Mr. Samuels. Mr. Spence.
Yes.
Mrs. Steeds. Dr. Santos absent. Mr. Taylor. Miss Thompson. Mrs. Thorne. Mr. Townsend. Miss Turner-Stewart. Mr. Walsh. Mrs. Watson. Mrs. White. Mr. Whittam. Mrs. Young.
So that is 46 for, 11 against, 5 abstentions. The recommendation within the response to the petition from the Cabinet member is agreed. Thank you. Item 6, the Leader's Statement. I call Tim Oliver, the Leader of the Council, to make his statement. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No one can deny that we are in the midst of an unprecedented uncertainty on a national level in this country. However, here in Surrey, after some years of huge challenge, upheaval and difficult decisions, we're looking to the future with renewed optimism and energy. We have set ourselves an ambitious programme of transformational change within this county that both reflects the challenges and opportunities of the modern age and that will allow us to make better choices and to invest for the future generations of this great county. We are on course to fulfil our ambition of moving closer to residents in the coming year, and I expect to be in a position to announce the new location of County Hall later this month. This will enable us to operate as a true civic heart within the county of Surrey. This will enable us to drive our modernisation agenda for all of us within this organisation to be more efficient, effective and tech-savvy for the benefit of our residents, and set us on course to be one of the leading councils in the country. We have moved quickly and effectively to address the historic poor performance of this organisation. We are now raising the bar. Our transformation programme is ambitious. At Cabinet later this month, we will report back on what has been achieved to date, as well as setting out what we will be doing in the next phase. Whilst there is more to do, key services have already had plans effectively agreed and delivered, and they are making a real difference to people's lives. Children's Services has shown some genuine improvements, and although we are by no means there yet, we are hopeful that inadequate ratings will be a thing of the past when we expect to be re-inspected by Ofsted next year. Just last month, Cabinet agreed plans to modernise the Surrey Fire and Rescue Service to make it fit for the future, including investing more money and recruiting more firefighters, upscaling prevention work and delivering a more mobile and dynamic response. A plan drawn up by and will be implemented by experts in fire and rescue. Her Majesty's Inspectorate, who identified much of the service as inadequate nearly a year ago, have been impressed with our plans, and I'm confident the next inspection will be altogether more positive. We are now starting to put detail around our vision for a greener future, committing to leading by example in reducing our carbon emissions, protecting and enhancing our countryside, improving air quality and working in partnership to face the climate emergency head-on will be a positive contribution from this county to what is a global issue. Let's address and implement things that we can do locally, but let's all take on the challenge together. The future of the planet is everybody's collective responsibility, and we must all do more. Part of this greener future work is, of course, recycling, and I was pleased to confirm at Cabinet last month that all of our community recycling centres will remain open and accessible for residents. Although we are the third best performing council of our kind in the whole country, that is still not good enough. We must do even more. And small changes can make the biggest differences. As an organisation, we must make it as easy as possible for residents to recycle more of their waste, and residents must step up and take every opportunity to make a difference. Mr. Chairman, over the coming weeks we will be finalising detailed proposals around our budget for 2021, and I will be presenting a budget statement at the November Council meeting. We've had to take some difficult decisions over the past couple of years to address the budget deficit, but with a clear focus on efficiency, innovative thinking and dedication of our staff, I believe we can now consider ourselves a stable and sustainable council ready for the future. This will enable us to make better choices, to invest in our residents as well as the next generation. Even with constrained funding, we have still been able to carry out more than 50,000 road repairs a year, create hundreds of apprenticeships, reduce the amount of council tax paid by care leavers, secure hundreds of millions of pounds in funding from government and other stakeholders for infrastructure and housing across the county, as well as continuing to deliver the services the residents depend on day in, day out. Looking forward, our services modernise, and reach more and more people in different ways, we are determined to invest in the county's future. That is why we will be committing hundreds of millions of pounds to protecting homes from flooding as we start the Surrey Flood Alleviation Scheme next year. We will be investing even more in our 3,000 miles of roads and pavements to ensure people can get around smoothly and safely. We will be announcing a series of initiatives to tackle the climate emergency and to protect our environment for future generations as the work of the Environment Commission we established starts to mature. Alongside all of this, we must remember that the majority of council tax goes on protecting and supporting the most vulnerable residents of Surrey through adult social care, looked after children and those with special education needs and disabilities. Surrey County Council spends over £1 million every single day looking after our adult residents that need our support, and £500,000 each day looking after our children. The government's proposed 2% precept on council tax for adult social care will go some way to helping meet those ever-increasing costs. However, it is a tiny fraction of the costs involved. We should never forget that it is our legal and more particularly our moral duty to care for the most vulnerable residents in society, and I will not let down those residents who need us most. As a transparent and responsible authority, we must share with our residents what we are doing on their behalf and with their money. So going forward, we will set out a series of commitments, a guarantee to do things that are relevant to our residents and by which they can judge our performance. We will build up these commitments over time, and indeed I would welcome any realistic suggestions from any member, but these will include planting at least one tree for every one of our 1.2 million residents, and I was very pleased to plant the first oak tree with the chairman on Saturday. We will be boosting our local economy by setting up a £50 million community grant fund to improve our high streets. We will provide surplus space in Surrey County Council buildings for free use by voluntary and charitable organisations. And where appropriate, we will consider converting any surplus council land that we own to public allotments to produce food for food banks. And as mentioned earlier, delivering further efficiencies, and we will deliver the further efficiencies we need to enable this council to remain on a sound financial footing so that we can meet the challenges of the future. The full list will be set out in a cabinet paper later this month. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I recognise that there is still much to do to improve the way in which we support our residents. However, we are creating a solid foundation on which to build a prosperous and exciting future, stabilising our finances, driving out inefficiencies, creating a more agile workforce, improving our partnership with key organisations across the county, being more transparent with our residents, and supporting communities to overcome challenges and grasp opportunities. I believe, and I hope, I'm sure all members will agree, we are making swift and effective progress, and that will enable us to deliver great quality services to support those who need our help the most, whilst delivering value for money for Surrey residents now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I call Mr. Darby.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Leader. First, I will start with some good news and well-deserved praise. Second, I will raise some issues of serious concern. And thirdly, comments about how we move forward. So the good news. Last time here, I raised the issue of secondary school places in the Dittons. There is still work to be done. However, for those children who now have a significant journey to school, we have a new extended bus route, saving most of them a 25-minute walk on top of the existing bus journey. Achieving that in around 5 weeks required cooperation at many levels within Surrey, working with parents, Cardinal Buses, Elmbridge Borough Council, and also local residents whose trees needed lopping. I would personally like to thank Val Sexton and Laurie James at Surrey, as well as Julie Isles and Joanna Killian, a fantastic example of what can be achieved working with partners and at short notice under pressure. Turning now to being a critical friend. Because of the significance of the matters we identified in our work, we were not satisfied that the Council put in place proper arrangements to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of resources for the year ended March 2019. That is a direct quote from Grant Thornton's audit report from August. Grant Thornton continued, because of weaknesses in the resilience of council finances and results of Ofsted reports into children's services provided by Surrey County Council, we therefore issued an adverse value for money conclusion in our audit report to the Council, 31st July 2019. We have received inadequate ratings for children's services, areas of the SEND service, Surrey Fire and Rescue, and most recently, Surrey Youth Offenders. I should also mention CCAM, the South East Area Ambulance Service, which we scrutinise. All cover vital services on which Surrey residents are entitled to rely. It seems to me there is an element of collective failure by all of us. We can try to make excuses, for instance, cabinet and leader changes, senior level changes, select committee reorganisation. There has clearly been significant progress, but we should never have got into this position. Ultimately, we need to take responsibility. What assurances can we have that from now on, these and any other services we will provide will be assessed at a minimum of good, that we will never again allow ourselves to get into this state? So to move on, in my observation, staffing issues are a factor in many cases, in other words, not enough staff or difficulty in recruiting. We also need to consult staff on the front line or to do so more frequently than now. They do and will have ideas on how to do better. It's not just about money. Query housing and key worker accommodation, how Surrey's property ownership can assist with truly affordable housing. And in that context, the excellent Surrey Place Ambition 2050 and working with partners and stakeholders to produce the right environment. To recap, praise where it's due, highlighting areas for concern, where residents are being left behind, and making suggestions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Botton.
Thank you, Chairman. I welcome the comments of the leader and his commitment to the provision of certainties, because he's absolutely right that our function as a county council, which is cradle and grave, does require certain principles and certain practices which we continue to improve. Principles must be competent to be principled and transparent and safe. And I bring to you this morning concerns from my inbox which we still need to work on. Notwithstanding what Mr. Darby has said about school place planning remains, in my view, our weakest approach to infrastructure delivery, particularly with emerging local plans. There are hundreds of properties due to be built in the next 18 months to 2 years in my division, and every school in Caterham Hill is full. That is an issue which we need to address to provide parents and families with certainty. I hugely welcome the new approach to the commissioning of SEND places for children and the ambition to provide places nearer home. There are families stuck in the system now who are still suffering from the fact that our provision has historically been inadequate. And I urge colleagues to work as hard as they can to ease their distress, to support them in the current circumstances, and to work hard to deliver the ambition that has been so clearly set out. Because, believe it or not, families continue to suffer. The fact that they have a child with special needs is challenging enough, but they have to fight the system too, and we have to address that. Our property portfolio still remains substantially untouched and is a desperate witness to our lethargy and our challenges in delivering changes there. My residents are also concerned about the environment and are particularly concerned that they are caught in a pincer movement between the ambitions of Heathrow Airport and the ambitions of Gatwick Airport, neither of whom talks to the other, neither of whom addresses a consistent or coordinated approach to mitigation. And I call upon this council to do its very best, not just to address the Heathrow issues, not just to address the Gatwick issues, but to bring a holistic approach which will see us universally tackle some of the challenges that my residents are going to suffer from. I congratulate the Council on the rollout of the Family Centre programme, and I'm particularly grateful for the work that they have done with Chandler District Council in my own division. I think that the final point I'd like to make is one about the general governance. You will note in this agenda, Chairman, that there is a list of changes to delegated action and changes to constitution. I believe that in the Nolan principles it would have been appropriate for those to be presented to us with track changes so that we can guarantee that one of the principles that we continue to fight for is transparency. Thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Mr. Botton. I don't see any other comments. Oh, yes, Mr. Essex.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the leader in what he describes as a time of uncertainty for giving us the opportunity to ask him questions as often as Boris has taken Prime Minister's questions in Parliament. But I'd like to draw on a thing which you said towards the end of your speech about surplus space and surplus land. You said that you will help communities to overcome challenges. One particular example I'd like to throw up in the air and ask you for support. In Redhill, a baby social enterprise and a community boxing club has recently been made homeless by a housing developer looking to build homes on their site. They need surplus space, as you've said, but they need it now. Can you help?
Thank you, Mr. Spence.
Thank you. I might disagree with you about the fire service, and I certainly share the reservations that Councillor Darby and Councillor Botton outlined, but I am supportive of much of the direction of traffic that you have outlined. I am a strong supporter of bringing the headquarters into Surrey and out of County Hall, so I look forward to your announcement with great interest. And also, I just want to mention the community recycling centres. The fact that you have retained them, I am very grateful for and think that was a good development. The last thing I'll mention in terms of the climate emergency, you may be aware that in Farnham, the Farnham Herald has launched its Cut the Pollution campaign, and Jeremy Hunt has organised a pollution summit on the 25th of October in Farnham because of the air pollution caused by the traffic. And I'm also very glad that there have been some good, productive conversations recently with highways and others about trying to move forward to deal with the traffic and air pollution problem in the centre of Farnham that Surrey will be very central to resolving. And again, I know Colin Kemp has been very involved in that, and I would like to thank him for his work on that so that we can move forward productively together on those areas where we do have shared concerns and agreed priorities.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. Just 2 points of clarification and an understanding. You talked about being tech savvy. You talked about agile workforce. I think we ought to have some confirmation or understanding that as far as IT in this county is concerned, particularly in the county council, we are going to be able to deliver the sort of tech savvy and agile working that he describes. It is, in the past, not been up to scratch, and we need to be looking forward to that. I need some confidence that that is actually going to happen over the next few years. I'm not talking about months, I understand that. The second point was, he mentioned about doing a budget statement in November. And I think the Children's Services Board is meeting in December. So, presumably, the budget statement hasn't taken account of any comments that might be made by a board after his budget statement. Just want to understand where that's coming from. I don't quite understand. He said he was making a statement in November. We have one on the 4th, I think it's the 4th or 5th of December. I just want to understand how that fits in with us being able to scrutinise the budget effectively.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Before the Leader replies, finally, Mrs. Muir.
I'm very pleased to hear that our transformation programmes seem to be going in the right direction, particularly with the Children's Services governing the recent reports. But As you know, my focus has always been on mental health, and I would like to stress that I would like to hear more about the integration across portfolios with regard to mental health. I welcome the news, the high-profile news yesterday of Every Mind Matters website, but 1 in 4 people suffer from mental health. And I see that we need to do 3 things. We need to do prevention, we need to do mitigation, and we need to help with all the services across every single portfolio to put the service providers, the charities, and everyone who is involved or is represented at the table at every single stage of our transformation programme. These people understand the best methods, the most efficient methods. They have established teams, and I would like to see that these people are at the very earliest stage part of the solution, part of the strategy, and ensure that the delivery is the most cost effective that we can imagine. But I do think they need to be there at the various early stages, and I'd be interested to know what the leader has to say on that.
Thank you. Leader, can you respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I have acknowledged in this chamber on many occasions and at many other opportunities my disappointment at the way in which many of the services in this council have been delivered over the previous years. There is nothing I can do about that, and indeed there is nothing any of us can do about that. What we can do, though, is address the way in which the services are currently being delivered and will be in the future. I listened to what the accountants say, who would ever be dismissive of an accountant, but at the end of the day, we delivered last year a balanced budget. For the first year in many, many years, this council did not use any of its reserves. This current year, it will not use any of its reserves, and next year, it will not use any of its reserves. All of that is as a result of driving efficiencies, and those are something like £500,000 a day has been taken out of the base cost of this budget by driving those efficiencies. But it's also not just about cutting costs, it's about improving the way and changing the way in which these services are being delivered. So I accept your point, Councillor Darby, that it is a collective failure of all elected members and all officers in the past. But at the end of the day, and I take responsibility for what this council is doing now, but my focus entirely is on driving hard the change that is needed and the transformation that is the programmes that are needed. In the October Cabinet meeting, you will see, as I mentioned earlier, an update on what we have done so far and what we will be doing. It's a living document. It's about our organisational strategy, I don't aspire to being good. I aspire to being outstanding in all of the services, and we will get there. In relation to Chris Botton's point, indeed, on school planning places, it's a challenge for this authority because we're not the planning authority. It does depend on the local plans as they go through their various iterations and get signed off. The officers here do try and keep up with that. There is, in fact, a new team in place now, and I would encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to meet with those officers, certainly in relation to your specific issues. I'm pleased you mentioned about SEND. That is a very real focus, inevitably, understandably, for this authority. We will be investing in building specialist facilities so that we can make sure that our children are nearer to home. That there are challenges around SEND. On the budget we will spend this year £33.5 million transporting children from home to school. That is an average of something in the region of £90 per child, compared with other comparable authorities, which is about £30 per child. So there's something wrong in the way in which we're doing that. But actually, far more important in terms of outcomes is to have that child nearer to the home. So we will be moving forward with those different initiatives. When I rejoined this council 2 years ago, I had the privilege of being given the portfolio for property. 2 years on, I'm not proud of the progress that we have made or have not made. We have a strategy that was passed in April this year, Asset in Place strategy, which I think is a good document. I think it's a working document. There is an action plan that sits behind it. The truth of the matter is that we have not had the resource to deliver that plan. Patricia Barry joined the County Council at the beginning of this week, and we have high expectations of what she will deliver. In fact, Mel Few and Natalie Brown and myself are meeting with her tomorrow to sort of go through our list of priorities so she can compare those with her list of priorities. But it's absolutely right. I mean, it is a wasting asset. We absolutely have to move forward with getting that property portfolio doing something, either, as I said earlier, for use for voluntary or charitable organisations or generating an income. We cannot allow it to continue as it, and we won't. On Heathrow expansion, we will be debating this later, and there's been many discussions with Robert Evans around the motion. I will repeat, though, what I said at Cabinet, which is that we have, as an authority, and certainly as a Cabinet, considerable concerns, increasing concerns about the expansion of Heathrow, because they don't, at the moment, it doesn't seem that Heathrow have necessarily been listening to the consequences of expansion in terms of the residents of Surrey. We have set those out in Councillor Kemp's letter and also in our response to the consultation. I did say, and that will be our position today, we need to wait to see how Heathrow respond to that consultation. It's not just us that has contributed to it, it's many others. But we are the meat in the sandwich, as Councillor Botton says. You know, we've got Heathrow at the top and we've got Gatwick at the bottom. And we need to make sure that whatever happens as part of the development consent orders, that there are sufficient protections put in there to our residents, both in terms of air quality, noise, and also around access. Heathrow cannot go ahead, mustn't go ahead without Southern Rail access. That is an absolute red line for this authority. And thank you, Chris Botton, for your comments about the Family Centre programme, which I think is going well. On general governance, Paul Evans, all the people that arrive here have all been given long lists of things to do. One of those is to look at our governance arrangements generally and our constitution. I think that we need to look hard at the way in which initiatives work their way through this organisation. We've tried to get them to start earlier in terms of the select committees looking at initiatives and with the working groups, but it is a convoluted system and we need to look at our cabinet papers and so on. So that will all be, we will pick up, I'm sure Paul heard your comment, he'll pick that up no doubt as part of his general review. Just on the school place planning, I'll put this pitch in as a county councillor rather than a borough councillor. SIL money, community infrastructure levy, is intended or is levied on developers for investment in infrastructure and in communities. And I would urge those of you that are Twin Hatters or can influence it, other borough councillors, to look at some of that SIL money being set aside to support schools. In my own borough this week, in my own division, Elmbridge Borough Council, to their credit, gave one of the local schools £150,000 from SIL to redevelop all of their toilet facilities. Yes, of course, the point was made, and I accept that actually it's a county-maintained school, and it is for us, therefore, to have the primary responsibility, and the county is putting money in. But actually, I think that is absolutely what SIL should be used for. It is there to support our communities, and it's a shame that it's got bogged down in sort of perhaps a bit of a disagreement between the borough and the county as to what it can be used for. In terms of Stephen Spencer's comment, I am co-hosting the meeting with Jeremy Hunt, you'll be pleased to know, I'm sure, on the 25th of October. So I look forward to discussing the air pollution issues, etc. in Farnham. And on to Chris Townsend's point about tech savvy, now I know, Chris, from our member meetings, that you struggled with your hybrid. Now, I wouldn't say that all the issues there are user errors, but we have to make sure that the equipment that you get is is right. I mean, we are going to look at, actually, I think I can say this, whether or not we actually do issue members with council equipment. Simply because, I mean, I think all of us get frustrated around the security issues, the 63 passwords you have to put in to get onto the system in the first place. And actually, I think nowadays, the security matters can be addressed, and actually it may well be that people prefer to use their own equipment and so on. So I think that's, but to your substantive point, there is a major piece of work that Michael Coughlin is leading around what we need in terms of digital solutions and IT solutions as we move forward with that Agile Workforce Programme, and it's absolutely essential that we have the equipment, but also the platform to make sure that works. I would encourage you to use the new gov.wi-fi thing, which is actually much better, I think, much more robust as you go around County Hall. And of course that's part of the broader initiative so you can go into any municipal building and you'll be able to log on, so in your borough councils and so on. On the budget statement, it is a budget statement, it's not the budget. It will be highlighting, it will be giving an indication of the direction of travel around council tax. It will also, I think, we will have greater clarity in November in terms of the government's recent announcements around adult social care funding, which I think we know about that. I don't think we know about what the special education needs disabilities. But so it will give you a hint as to where we're going, and obviously we won't get the settlement until December anyway. So there'll be the usual budget meeting in February. And then finally, Chairman, just in terms of Bernie Muir's comments, I mean, I think mental health is absolutely a key priority. I think all of that will be picked up as part of the work we're doing around the integration of health and social care. We've set up a specific board to drive forward that. And if you look at the 3 priority areas that have been identified in the 10-year health and wellbeing plan, mental health is absolutely up there in terms of things that we need to properly address. I hope that when we start to pilot later this year the local partnership boards, where we will actively be looking for collaboration and cooperation with local communities around things. That is exactly the sort of issue, I think, where you can have some really good local input from specialist organisations. But it's absolutely there in terms of the health and wellbeing priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Very comprehensive reply. Moving to item 7, members' question time, included in the supplementary agenda you've got. Part 1, notice of 11 questions, 5 minutes per question for supplementaries. These must be framed as questions, please, members, not statements, and the question time is limited to 45 minutes, at which point I'll finish the question we're on and close the item. And if any questions aren't covered in that 45 minutes, you can, of course, follow up with the relevant Cabinet member after the meeting. So, question 1, Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank the Cabinet member for her response and the lovely coloured pictures with it. One of the points she makes is about putting in place a process over the next 6 months. Again, we are waiting, so I'd like a little bit more accuracy than over the next 6 months, if she could respond to that. And the other point is, she also talks about the Level 2 early help, 0 to 9 year olds is also being recommissioned to create a lead provider in each district. Perhaps you could provide me with more information about that. I've not seen that before. Are we going out commissioning again to new providers, or the same providers? Need to understand what that actually means. Thank you, Chairman.
Before Mrs. Lewis replies, we've got a couple of supplementaries. Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. And the question and the reply is helpful to move things forward. My question is about the first level, making buildings available to local communities and voluntary sectors. Is it our intention to charge rent, or to provide those so that the voluntary sector can use their funds to provide youth workers rather than pay us rent? So that would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Funnily enough, following on from what Councillor Harrison has just said, I'll put my questions in context first, if I may. Listening to the earlier question and response, and having seen the Cabinet Members' report, I've got two supplementaries, if I may, Chair. To put these into context, Councillor Townsend was absolutely right in the points he's raised in his question and supplementaries. And Councillor Harrison and I both know too well that locally, in our divisions, we have deprived area of Preston and Reigate and Bansford, where I think it's fair to say over the last 2 years have been fairly turbulent times for the youth service. But last Friday, I had the opportunity to visit a new youth group called Mighty, M-Y-T-I, and you can look it up on Google if you'd like. And this is operated by passionate local people who live on the estate, live locally, got a passion for the young people there. And it's in the appropriately named Phoenix Youth Centre. When I went there, instead of the usual tumbleweed and silence, which we've both got used to, I was met with what could only be called a cacophony of kids.
Sorry about a cacophony, Mr. Harris, but could I have a cacophony of a question, please?
The question is coming, Chair.
Can it come sooner rather than later?
What I'm getting, the point I'm trying to make before the question is it was an organised chaos of children. They were laughing, they were playing, they were talking, they were interacting. Not one of them was sitting there playing on an iPad. I know it's early days and we need to encourage a lot. My questions are, does a Cabinet member share my belief that with the passion of local people, supported by the County Council and districts and boroughs, and other partners such as the YMCA, we can build what's called a field of dreams and actually build it and they will come for our young people. And secondly, probably more importantly, can I ask that she encourages officers, particularly those in interim positions, to take advantage of the knowledge and understanding of local members, district and borough members, and achieve our field of dreams, but more importantly, not just inform them, but involve them. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Povey.
Thank you, Chairman. I welcome the Cabinet Member's comment that where the county owns youth buildings, that they would be made available to voluntary sector. But what about those areas like Cranley, where the county didn't own the youth building, and paid rent to the local parish council to use it? Would they be subsidising those? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Povey. Mrs. Lewis.
Thank you very much. And not many people in the chamber realise how much Dr. Povey, Jeff Harris, Nick Harrison, Chris Townsend and I have in common with Bill Gates. But all of us are what I think he would describe as impatient optimists. We all really believe that things can be better and we want to get on with it now. And I thank them for that, and I really thank them for a lot of things when it comes to youth, because they were 4 of only 14 members who attended when we had a very detailed briefing on youth just before Easter. And it was a very transparent briefing in which officers were very honest about the things that we needed to do quickly, including in the youth offending service. And I'm going to refer here to the coloured diagram. They told us a lot about how we needed to get our targeted and specialist youth services right. That's the reddy, orange and the amber bits on the diagram. We had to get those right at speed. It was an absolute imperative. And as the lead member, I therefore had to rein in some of my impatience about the green area, the universal youth work, which is not where our statutory responsibilities lie. So officers, with my blessing, have been working very hard on a restructure to get the targeted and specialist work right, so that we can fulfil our statutory obligations to the children and young people who really need our support the most. And therefore it's been a little bit slower getting to the area where our impatience about the universal bit comes into play. So I thank all of you for your sustained interest in finding out about these things and in asking these questions today. But that is the reason why it's taken a little bit longer. However, we're now in a position where we've got our restructure done. We've got these targeted and specialist teams up and running. We have passed through Cabinet, Mr Townsend, the report that tells you about the recommissioning of early help. You'll be able to have a look into that, and about how we're going to have lead providers in each district and borough, so that they will be able to work in a much more coherent way with our targeted and specialist teams for step up and step down, because it did say in our Ofsted report that our previous early help work wasn't clearly understood or well enough coordinated. So all of those things are coming together, and we're going to have some time to think about what do we do about this universal youth work, which we all think is beneficial for our young people, but it isn't a strategic, it's not a statutory obligation of the county council. So what we're going to be doing is having a consultation that runs in parallel with the library consultation, which I think is really good, because we always want these things to be done in a joined-up way. And it will go borough by borough around the county, or area by area. I think it's north, south, east, west, something logical like that, where we talk to local members, as been mentioned, both from districts and boroughs and also from the county council, a voluntary community faith sector in that area, current stakeholders who are already providing things in the area, and we come up with really good local-based solutions going forward for how our buildings can be given free of charge when we own them, where we are retained youth workers. We already spend $600,000 a year on youth workers. We'll carry on doing that, how they can be deployed to get these things going and then step back so that the voluntary community faith sector can do it. That detailed consultation will be taking place, and that's where the 6 months comes in, Mr. Townsend. And we will, all of that will be going on whilst the consultation happens. We'll be having these conversations. So if we start off in the south east with Mole Valley, Reigate and Banstead and Tandridge from November onwards, then we move to the north east, the north west, the south west, and coming to a formal decision in about May on exactly what will be provided in each area. But we don't want to hold things up. And as Mr. Harris has already described for us, there's a cacophony of noise coming already from some of our youth centres, and in the interim, whilst we're getting the permanent solutions in place, we have already got some short-term solutions evolving in different youth centres which have been empty, and one of them was the one that you witnessed. I know there are others going on in the county. I think you, Mr. Townsend, have had a letter from officers empowering you to get on in your area. So this is a great opportunity for us as members to get together with the voluntary community faith sector, with officers from the county council, and really to bring these buildings back to life. As the leader said earlier, they'll be offered free of charge where we own the buildings, and there'll be other local arrangements to make sure we're really supporting this work that is not our statutory duty, but that we all agree is a good thing to happen in those areas. I hope that covers the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Lewis. Question 2, Mr. Kington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note Councillor Goodman's response, and I'm encouraged by Surrey County Council's commitment to facilitate the planting of 1.2 billion trees. However, in regard to the specific issue of urban trees, I find the response disappointing. Is the Cabinet Member for Environment and Waste aware that when this issue was raised with highway officers at the September meeting of the Epsom and Newell Local Committee, members were subjected to the same long list of reasons why trees cannot be planted in our urban areas? Is he, like me, concerned that the messages currently being put out by some officers continues to be anything but proactive and positive in regarding the increasing the number of trees planted in residential streets?
Mr. Essex.
Thank you. I think the answer talks about a reply in December. Is it possible to have a draft circulated earlier so we can get on and plant some trees, or at least order the right ones so we can plant them as soon as the strategy comes out? Thanks.
Mr. MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to say, first of all, I think it's a terrific idea that we're planting a tree for every member of the population in Surrey. It'd be nice if we could each have an individual tree that we could adopt and have a name on it, and then we could go along and look after it, water it, give it plant food, trim it when necessary, etc. But I have another point I'd like to make, and I brought this up at the Council before. One of the big problems in the urban areas, as has been referred to by Mr. Kingston, is when trees come to end of life. At the moment, they're cut down to approximately a metre high, and more members of the residents in Farnham are beginning to complain about this. And I'd like to see what Mr Goodman thinks could be done about that, because we not only need to plant trees, we need to deal properly with them when they reach the end of life. Another point I'd like to make, it would be nice if we could also get a commitment from housing developers. This has again been suggested to be by a resident in Farnham, so that for every house that's built in Surrey, a tree has to be planted by the developer. That would be equivalent to us doing it for each member of the population. So I'd like to hear Mr Goodman's response to these suggestions. Thank you, Chairman.
Questions, not suggestions, I'm sure, Mr MacLeod. Mr Furness.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I was like to ask the Cabinet Member whether he would agree that highways tree questions would be better referred to the Cabinet Member for Highways rather than himself. However, I hope that he would agree with me and welcome the news that our partnership work with the Royal Horticultural Society on what are the best trees to plant, the best species for dealing with the best situation, will be better as an engineering alternative than going straight in for a full engineering method. Thank you, Chairman.
Two more questions, Mr Goodman. Mr Harmer.
Yes, I'd like to ask the Cabinet Member if he would agree with me that the strength of the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere in Surrey is largely in the urban areas, and so logically you might think it would be quite a good idea to concentrate on planting the trees in same said urban areas, in which respect I agree with one or two people over there who've commented in the same way. And I'd just like to suggest to him also, I don't know whether he's planning to acquire the saplings that he needs, but also you'll find that if you talk to the members who represent urban areas, that we are oversaturated with saplings every year that we have to get rid of because they get in the way.
In the rural areas.
In the rural areas.
Yes.
And finally, Mr Hawkins.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on one point, planning permissions normally dictate replacement trees. But my question is to, I'm not quite sure now, after an earlier comment, who I should be putting this to, but can I just ask, from a planning perspective, that due thought is given to what is planted and where? 20, 30 years on, part of my division, we're having a lot of problems with root growth, digging up roads, pavements, houses, so please be aware, if I may ask you, of the type and sort of property of tree that is planted and where, looking forward and not just in the short term. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, Mr Goodman, a gamut of stuff to respond to. Go ahead.
Isn't it amazing how one announcement can generate so much enthusiasm and questions? Regarding the urban trees, Matt is right, it does come under Matt in the highways, but what we are doing is working with Matt's team to make sure we get the right solution to this. That is why it's taken us some time to get the strategy right. We're not rushing into it. We want to make sure it's right. The team have been working on it for some time, but we must make sure we get it right. We must make sure we plant the right trees. This isn't about planting trees for today, it's planting trees for future generations. And trees, we need to look at trees, and that's why Kew Gardens we're particularly working with, to make sure we plant the right trees, because trees that are right today may not be right in the future. So we are working very closely with them as well. With the point about the developers, absolutely right. That, I think, will go into the strategy, that we need to encourage developers to replant trees when they take it away, and when they remove them. And I don't think that's really done as well as it could be. I think that the strange thing that was mentioned by Jonathan Essex was that we need a strategy to plant a tree. What he said was that, can we get on and plant them? Well, the leader already announced that he's planted the first one, and I'm delighted to say that over last weekend, we planted 611 trees, because we gave 600 trees away to children and grandchildren, and Peter Martin's grandchildren had a tree, and they went home and planted it. So we've already started it, but we do need a strategy to make sure we put them in the right places, because what we must do is not put them, as some people do, in the wrong places. There is a right and wrong place to put trees, but there is an awful lot of work being done. What I can say to you is we would hope to have the strategy first draft by sort of November time, and I will be using the scrutiny board to look at it, but I think it's going to be quite an exciting strategy to deliver improvements. And somebody mentioned about carbon. Remember, after 40 years, each tree would take 1 tonne of carbon. So they're really good for the environment, really good route to reduce air pollution. I think I covered most of your questions.
Can
I
raise
will
a
allow
point of order
Mr. King to come back.
Under Standing Order 10.1. Standing Order 10.1 says that any member can ask a question in respect of the powers of duties of a cabinet member. If a member does get the council cabinet member wrong, could you advise the cabinet members that they might actually pass the question over so that their colleagues don't get upset when they actually haven't had the question asked of them?
Valid point of order. Thank you. Noted, Mr. Kington. Thank you. Moving on to Mr. Darby, question 3.
Thank you, Chairman. It's really my second question, a point of clarification on savings. In other words, really, how is rent going to be taken into account? I rather assume that as we own County Hall, there's no rent payable on it, and as and when we move wherever it is, there will presumably be a rent payable. So is that taken into account in the net savings that have been calculated? In other words, 0 for County Hall, and let's say we take 20,000 square feet somewhere else, £30 a square feet equals 600,000. It's just a point of clarification.
Thank you. No other. Oh, Mr. Bennison.
Could you just clarify, I don't know who I'm talking to, but can you just clarify that if we sell this building, and I may have missed it somewhere in here, what are we doing about the paintings, which have got a lot of history and some haven't got any history and just happen to be beautiful pictures, the clocks and furniture and anything else that's not nailed down, including, say, David Hodges' photograph? Could you just tell us what we're likely to be doing with all these items?
Thank you. Lastly, Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. The question didn't ask about capital funding, but that is obviously a very important element of what we're going to do. And this building has served us well for well over 100 years. I don't know how much it cost, very little in today's numbers, but I would ask if you are looking at freehold sites, because I think that would be the right long-term solution for this county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver.
Thank you, Chairman. And Ms. Howson, you've hit the nail on the head. So that deals with Nick Darby's point. The building that we are currently negotiating on will be for the freehold. So there will be no rent. And of course, at the moment, we pay business rates to the Royal Borough of Kingston, whereas within the county, we'll be paying business rates to ourselves. In terms of the assets, in fact, I had a conversation with Richard Walsh, dare I say, in the men's toilets earlier. He's got his eye on the shoe shining machine in there. So, of course, all of those sort of movable assets, I'm sure we will take with us. I'm not so sure about the picture of David Hodge there.
Too much on movable assets, Leader. Thank you. Question 4, Mrs. Watson. Do you have a supplementary? No supplementary. Thank you. Question 5, Mr. Forster.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very short supplementary for me. In taking the spirit of Mary Lewis's sort of impatient optimist, shouldn't we be working to improve air quality now rather than wait and see? Will the Leader agree with me to back the bill as soon as possible and work to improve our air quality now? As, like Mary Lewis said, we should be working on things now, not waiting.
Thank you. Leader.
We are working on improving air quality now. I mean, in relation to schools in specific, there was a public health initiative last year, and there will be a continuing one. So this isn't about not getting on and addressing air quality. The problem with the bill at the moment is there is no detail. So as I understand it, the plan is to bring in fines for people that idle outside or in sensitive places, particularly outside schools. And I think that in principle may be right, but you have to be careful that it's not just seen as a revenue-raising exercise rather than actually addressing the causes. So at the moment, our focus, I think, is on educating people about air quality issues and driving that forward. And of course, we'll see what the bill says, and if it's a sensible bill, I'm quite sure we'll support it.
Thank you. Question 6, Mrs. Barton.
Oh, thank you very much. I've just got a quick supplementary. I continue to be really concerned about the nighttime cover, particularly for Hazelmere, which is geographically quite isolated in some ways. The response to question 2 says that there's no guarantee of the availability of either whole-time staff or on-call staff. And I'm really concerned, really, because actually the strategy relies even more heavily on on-call staff. And I did meet with the police officers, the fire officers who explained it takes over 2 years to train an on-call member of staff. And I just want to know, how is this strategy possible, given the shortage of staff and the time it will take to actually train up the staff we need? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Turner-Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman. As was set out in the address that I gave at the beginning of the meeting, I think there was a detailed account given of our recruitment arrangements, the fact that recruitment is ongoing. I think the response actually details the 2 on-call courses that are going to be taking place before April. We are looking to reform our on-call function, and that is a key part of our plan. And indeed, just for an assurance piece, we have an independent evaluation which will be led by Sir Ken Knight, who was the last Fire and Rescue Government Advisor, and that begins next week. So, as with every measure that Surrey Fire and Rescue takes, there is always some expert validation of the actions and the plans before they're worked up and implemented, and that will continue, and that will form a key part as well of the Fire Transformation Working Group and the Select Committee monitoring. That will all be monitored throughout. So just to give you that assurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 7, Mr. Cooksey.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We're about 10 weeks away from the 22nd of December, I think. I wonder if I could be informed whether a contract has now been awarded for this work and whether a start date has been agreed.
Mr. Pugh.
Yeah, in my reply, I answered your question that by the end of December you will see work on that site.
Thank you. Question 8, Mr. Kington.
Thank you, Chairman. I note the reply, but I'm sure it would have been much shorter had it focused on the questions I asked rather than those I did not. So I will try again, Councillor Oliver. Firstly, will you ensure that emails sent out by Cabinet members reporting the detail of the inspections reports are an unedited list of progress made, as well as those services continuing to cause concern, with no exclusions? Secondly, will he advise members of any service area which, if currently inspected today, would be the cause of serious concern, or is he telling us today that all of Surrey County Council services are now working to a good to high standard?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask the Leader if he agrees with me that a very good way for members to be better informed about the services that Cabinet members are worried about, that officers are worried about, is for them to attend member briefings, which are held regularly. I've already mentioned the one on youth services, which would have given some early warning about how concerned we were about our targeted services to youth, which was only attended by 14 members. The most recent one on the children's services improvement, where officers and lead members spoke in great detail about their concerns about SEND services and CAM services, as well as children's social care. There's some hints for you, Mr. Kingston, about ones we're worried about. Only 32 members attended that. So does the Leader agree with me that it would be very good for members to become even better informed and to be able to make even better contributions in scrutiny committees by attending those things that are offered for them? And then perhaps when letters go out about substantial progress, for example, in the CSPAR, listing some of the substantial progress that's been made, members would understand how significant those were as enablers for improvement in other parts of the service, rather than worrying about them being given a positive spin, as Mr. Kington has suggested in the past. And also, does the Leader agree with me that a sentence reading, I am very pleased by the positive feedback, but I'm also conscious that this monitoring visit covered only one area of the service and that there are others still requiring attention and improvement, gives a balance between being pleased, praising officers, for progress that has been made and being realistic about other things that still need to be done. Thank you.
Leader.
I think Mrs. Lewis has answered the question.
But they were both questions excellently put.
Mr. Kingston, I mean, the Cabinet regularly updates on what activities are happening, what actions are happening. There is a whole transformation programme. It couldn't be more transparent. I haven't seen you at Cabinet, Mr. Kingston. I haven't seen that you've attended any of the select committees. You've not participated in any of the working groups. You've not been to any member briefings, and you've not asked for any meetings with any executive directors. So if you want to find out what is going on, and you don't think you can by looking at the website and looking at these published reports, then perhaps you should engage more actively with the governance of this council.
Question 9, Mr. Forster.
No further questions, Chairman.
Question 10, Mr. Kinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note the reply and the admission that there will be more six-figure posts advertised in the future, and I thank the leader for that comment. Is Councillor Oliver's reluctance to have the senior management pay cost centre monitored, say annually, by a specific committee, because he finds such public discussion an embarrassment, or because he believes that council taxpayers have no interest in these matters?
Thank you. Is it possible to confirm that all of these senior posts are now full-time confirmed posts, not interim posts, and if not confirmed, how many are still interim?
Thank you. Leader.
There is no lack of transparency. You continually ask this question, Mr. Kingston. You sit on the PPDC. It is not for you as an elected member to instruct the Chief Executive on the employment of her officers. We have no jurisdiction to do that. The salaries are on the website in the statements of account. If you can look at those. There's no lack of transparency about this. This is not because I don't think I have no interest in providing value for money for residents. Quite the reverse. But at the end of the day, we need to pay good quality people a commercial rate to attract them to this county. Part of the issues we've been discussing earlier is the poor performance of this authority. And part of the way of addressing that is to employ good quality people who have delivered better quality services in other authorities. To Mr. Essex's point, I don't actually know the actual answer to the question around who is interims. What I do know is that we are now seeing a significantly reduced number of interims remain in the organisation. We will have, I think, seen the last interim go within the next few months. Some of these are interims that are doing specific project pieces. They're not just, but there is an active recruitment process for all of the senior roles, and I'll come back to you with an accurate answer. But I am as keen as anybody to get permanent people in post, because those are the people who will have the responsibility and the accountability for taking these services forward.
Thank you, Leader. Final question, third question for Mr. Forster. Do you have a supplementary?
No further questions.
No? So that's the end of item 7.1. Turning to item 7.2, we've got another 15 minutes for members to ask questions of Cabinet members based on the previously circulated Cabinet member briefings, which I'll take on a first-come, first-served basis. And there will be no supplementaries. Do we have any at all? No? Thank you, members. So moving on to item 8, statements by members on local issues. No, I haven't received any statements. So item 9, original motions. I've received notice of 3 original motions. The first motion is standing in the name of Ms. Chris Botton, and understanding Order 12.3, Council has to decide if it wishes to debate this motion today, which I think we do. Thank you. Mr. Botton, I understand that you wish to table an amendment to your original motion, and copies apparently have been circulated. So if we want to proceed as we do, Mr. Botton, would you move your amended motion, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Since I believe there will be cross-party support for this motion, I shan't dwell on all the details within it, and I'm grateful to Mrs Mooney for her support in the reformulation of this motion. I seek to address two questions, Chairman, here. The first is the obvious and easy one, and that is that there is simply not enough money available for adult social care in this country, in this county, or anywhere. The lack of money places services at risk, makes them fragile, makes providers fragile. We heard only in the last few days that Four Seasons care homes are no longer paying money to their landlords because they can't afford it. And we know that the staffing is vulnerable as a result of Brexit uncertainty. So we know that the market out there is challenging and difficult. And I pay tribute to our excellent officers who are managing that market and doing their best to make sure our residents in care homes remain safe. But one of the most important issues that I wish to get across in this motion, Chairman, is not that it's just about money. There need to be significant changes of policy. One of the most hidden, neglected and underestimated challenges that residents and older people face is the continuing iniquity of rationing of NHS continuing care. It is scandalous to me that if I'm become, God forbid, doubly incontinent tomorrow as a result of a cancer or some other organic problem, it is a problem for the NHS. If my partner or I become doubly incontinent as a result of Alzheimer's, it's social care. That isn't right. It makes no sense to people. People have to fight the system. I spent 3 years chairing appeal panels from up and down the South region, listening to families' angst about how they could get the best care for their loved one because the NHS was refusing to pay for it. Stroke victims, people with Alzheimer's, people just growing older and older. The NHS is rationing its health care and the county council picks up the tab. And where the county council doesn't, because of the savings of the residents, they have to sell their house. Chairman, that is the triple bereavement. The first bereavement is the loss of a loved one to a dementia, which means that they no longer are aware of it. The second bereavement is the loss of the loved one. And the third bereavement has been the loss of the home that you built with that loved one because you've had to pay for care. These scandals, Chairman, are besetting all our residents as they grow older, and simply kicking the can down the road by offering a 2% precept or something like that is not going to address these fundamental injustices. The rationing of continuing care is in my view, a national scandal. It's very much postcode lottery. It's far easier to get packages of continuing care in London and in the north than it is in the south and the south-east. Why our residents have to suffer from that discrimination, I do not know, but it's a fact that they do. And I know this council has done a lot to work with the NHS and continuing care to try and solve some of the problems locally, but it cannot solve the fundamental policy problems that exist at root of the issue. There needs to be a fundamental review of how we fund and provide and care for our old people as they grow older and need support and care. So I call upon the government and this council to support me in this, radically to address these policy inequities and iniquities as soon as is practicable, because simply adding extra money, kicking the can down the road, will not solve the fundamental injustices which I've described. We need more money and a structure to secure the provider market out there, but we also need justice for people who genuinely fight to support their loved ones. Chairman, I move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Botton. Mrs. Goodwin, do you want to speak now or reserve your position? Speak now. Do go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was invited to have tea at a local care home last Friday. I normally go 3 or 4 times a year. And on this occasion, I was introduced to 2 new faces. A gentleman who was in his early 70s and his wife who had moved into the care home only 3 weeks earlier. She was 66 and had dementia. They were paying for the care from their savings. And I asked him how he found the process of actually, securing this care and getting a place for his wife. And he looked at me and he said, it was traumatic. And he said, until a few weeks ago, I actually felt suicidal, he told me, because the process was purely focused on finances. Not any empathy for his wife or himself as a carer. And I came away from that afternoon tea feeling quite low, really unhappy that one of my residents, because they were now in my Guildford North division, had had to go through that experience. And I don't think any of us here would want any of our own residents to go through that experience feeling that way. So our government does need to care more. Our government needs to have the courage to propose a social care policy that is fair and equitable. Our government needs to stop short-term, piecemeal funding, as local authorities cannot plan and build capacity in the care provider market. It is for these reasons that I'm supporting this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's 2 years to the day since my father-in-law died. He was 97. I had power of attorney and looked after him financially for the last 10 years or so of his life, including the last 3 years which he spent in a nursing home in Godalming, a wonderful nursing home. At the end, I guess we were paying something like £1,200 a week for him to be there. As a self-funder, we did have some allowances from government sources, but they certainly didn't cover that much. Just next door, there was a person in a similar-sized room funded by the county council, but of course that person was being charged, or the county council was being charged 1/3 less than the fees that we were paying. That's a tremendous injustice to those who have to self-fund. We must sort that out, and we must sort the whole programme of what we do as we all grow older and potentially have to move into long-term care. It's a huge problem which repeatedly government after government has failed to tackle, and I think it's one of the greatest issues that we face today, and therefore I'm very pleased to be able to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Povey.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with much of what the proposer said and the general thrust of it. But in his comments, he made the point that there was insufficient money for the social care system. But in his sort of second paragraph, he talks about taking social care in-house. And perhaps I could just remind members that when social care was contracted out, the cost per hour halved.
Thank you, Dr. Povey. I think this is really a consensus motion, so we'll go straight to the vote. If I put the motion that votes for, if you could press yes and raise your hand. Didn't need to. Thank you. Votes against? Abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Evans. Understanding Order 12-3, Council has to decide if it wishes to debate this motion today. Does Council wish to debate the motion now? Thank you. So, Mr. Evans, if you'd move your motion, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, colleagues. Sometimes, like me, I'm sure you come here and you wonder why we are debating things or whether what we're discussing will actually make any difference to the people of Surrey. This motion before us now is not just about the future of Heathrow Airport or the future of aviation or even climate change, crucial as that is. But more importantly, it's about the lives of our families, our residents and of generations to come. If we pass this motion today, we'll be taking a bold stance. We'll be finally getting off the fence as a council and saying that no one can be taking Surrey's support for granted. Certainly not when you consider the broken promises over many years and the fact that neither Heathrow nor the government have listened to what we've said in the past. And I reference to Council motion of July 2013, another one in December 2016, when our requests have been ignored. Many of you, I'm sure, as Councillor Lewis will be aware, many of you will have attended the briefing in July here in County Hall, or you will have been to one of the road shows around the area where Heathrow Airport have explained their development plan. A plan that will deprive the people I represent in Stanwell and Stanwell Moor of hundreds of acres of green belt as the airport creeps southwards. It's a plan that will do nothing for the climate, and it's a project that will mean years of misery, overcrowded roads and disruption that could last for 30 years to complete, as this is a project that talks about going up to 2050, which, great respect, should see most of us out. By their own admission, Heathrow say in here, the people of Stanwell will experience dust, atmospheric pollution and increased vehicle emission. It says so in here. Our roads in Spelthorne, as in many other boroughs, are already overcrowded. This plan will lead to a huge increase in construction traffic and congestion as the drivers inevitably take a rat run through Spelthorne, Elmbridge, Runnymede and all our towns and villages. Each of us knows, I'm sure, when there's a hold-up on the M25, how the knock-on is onto the roads around the area. And that will only be worse if this plan is allowed to go unchecked. The largest car park in the world, some 24,000 places, is planned for in Stanwell. A huge new junction for the M25, where it's going to be diverted, is being planned at Stanwell Moor. Rivers will have to be diverted and communities displaced. Open spaces will be lost and the environment will be damaged with little or no redeeming features. And have the people of Stanwell, Stanwell Moor, that I represent, been offered compensation for their inconvenience, for the negative impacts on their health, or for the loss of the value of the property? No, they've not. They've been excluded, even though those in north of Heathrow, in Hillingdon, have been promised compensation. If we pass this motion today, we'll be supporting Spelthorne Council, a Conservative-controlled council, in their call for fair treatment for the residents, for proper compensation, decent safeguards, nothing more, colleagues, nothing less. Importantly and crucially, we must hold Heathrow and the government to account on proper modern transport links. We must have improved public transport to link Surrey with Heathrow, as the leader said earlier on. Links to not just Staines, but Woking, Farnham, Guildford, not just more crowded roads. Despite being next door to Heathrow and bordering Surrey, you cannot get to the airport by train from anywhere in this county without going into London. And I don't know of people who do, trying to get to Heathrow, go into London and come out again. No other airport in Europe has such poor rail links. I was in Brussels last week and the train link to the airport starts at 4 in the morning and then they go through just about every 20 minutes throughout the day, so people do that. People don't drive to the airport. And new rail links in the comprehensive document. Some of you will have seen this, over 100 pages of it. They're not in the new report. We've asked for it before in this council. The leader's spoken about it. And they've been promised in the past, but it's not happened. And I suggest, Chair, it never will if we fail to stand up and be counted today. If we sit back and expect Heathrow Airport, this government, or indeed any future government of whatever colour, to build these links, we'll be disappointed. As disappointed, I suggest, of those of you who still think that Boris Johnson is going to lie down in front of the bulldozers to stop the extra runway being built. Now I know, because I've listened to some of you here telling me off the record, that you'd like him to lie down in front of bulldozers. I know that, and I won't ask for a recorded vote on that, but I do know that. But we're not going to ask that because we're a compassionate county, and a compassionate county must speak up for its residents and say enough is enough. No expansion without compensation, no extra runway without a railway, no more flights with their negative impact on health and our climate. Enough is enough. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Mr. Essex, you're seconding.
Thank you. May I reserve my right?
Certainly. So, debate is open for members. Mr. Goodman.
Thank you, Chairman. We last debated the expansion of Heathrow in October of last year. And at this time, Council supported the crucial role that Heathrow plays in employment in Surrey and the investment in the economy and attracting major businesses. It urged Heathrow to deliver the environmental and infrastructure issues. And Council wanted continued engagement by the Heathrow Strategic Planning Group and Heathrow Management. We pressed the right to have the right level of compensation for residents. A key part of the motion was the insistence that the infrastructure must be in place prior to the new runway being operational. And finally, it called on the government to prioritise Southern Rail. Well, we have now submitted our comprehensive replies to the consultation, together with an excellent letter from Colin Kemp to the Chief Executive, John Holland Kay. These documents clearly demonstrate SCC views and concerns about Heathrow expansion. And I would like to thank officers particularly for the diligence they did in putting this together, and for the Select Committee in the way they approached this subject when it was discussed. SCC's position has not changed. We need the implementation of Southern Rail access before the third runway is operational, and the appropriate measures on road infrastructure. Some members will recall during the development of Terminal 5, we were promised rail into Heathrow. What happened? Well, we have a rail station, but no rail track. Members, this cannot happen again, and we must have Southern Rail links into Heathrow. The leader met Grant Shapps last week, the Transport Cabinet member, and with myself will be meeting Paul Maynard, the Minister responsible for aviation and rail links into Heathrow. The leader will be making it clear that Southern Rail is a red line, as the leader said today, for the Council and, more importantly, the residents of Surrey. The government need to find a way with Heathrow to deliver Southern Rail. No ifs, no buts. It is also disappointing that we are still waiting for the modelling information from Heathrow, despite being given promises that on a number of occasions we would receive it. Without this, we cannot be sure the right level of mitigation is being delivered on our roads, which is again essential for our residents. And bus services, already mentioned, we need appropriate bus services into Heathrow. This Council has declared a climate emergency and have started to work on delivering changes to reduce Surrey's emissions. The government's target of net zero carbon by 2050 is challenging, but it can be achieved. However, there are a number of issues directly related to the airport that must be resolved. The removal of the 220 acres of the Green Belt in the north of Speltham is certainly one of them. Speltham already have many challenges in tackling air quality, and we must see more partnership with Heathrow and Speltham in helping to address these issues. The recent Climate Commission report on aviation states that the current planned additional airport capacity in London, including the third runway at Heathrow, is likely to leave it, at most, very limited room for growth at non-London airports. The question we have posed to the government is, what does this actually mean? It is confusing and unclear, and we have written to the Department for Transport for clarification. Reading the report itself, I believe it is not ambitious enough in setting up alternative fuels for use in aircraft in the future. These aircraft are already being trialled in a number of locations and would have a significant reduction in the emissions. And I'll report back to the members once we have received clarification. The current judicial review by a number of councils was rejected, but they have given leave to appeal, and we will wait with interest the outcome. This council will continue to engage with Heathrow through the Heathrow Transport to Strategic Planning Group and directly with Heathrow. The leader and the CEO of the council will continue with direct meetings with John Holland Kay of Heathrow. They will continue to challenge Heathrow until all our concerns have been addressed by them. Members, if SCC are not confident that the concerns have been heard and action taken for the benefit of our residents, then we will have to consider a further motion in the future at full council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thank you, Chairman, very much indeed. As regards Mr. Evans, Comrade Evans, I say, a neighbour and a good friend, I feel like, in a sense, being the St. Augustine of Hersham. Lord, make me chaste, but not quite yet. Because the reason I say that, albeit it's a poor joke, is that in terms of what Mr. Evans has said in his notes, I agree entirely with him. I think he's absolutely spot on. Indeed, I would think he's actually been quite modest and moderate in his language. Indeed you are, and a lot to be modest about. A lot to be modest about. Have no shame, sir, have no shame. Because the key, the central point here, which Mr. Goodman has just said, and was reflected in the Select Committee meeting only a couple of weeks ago, and I hate to pray in name, Paul Deach, was it is characteristically robust. I think he said the consultation process so far has been a farce or a charade, and he and along all of us, I'm very disappointed and dismayed by Heathrow's attitude thus far. Colin Kemp's letter and the attachments that were considered by the Select Committee are very, very powerful indeed. They constitute an indictment, yes, an indictment of Heathrow Airport's lack of willingness to address even the most basic of the requests that this County Council, on behalf of Surrey residents, have put over the months and up to now. This cannot go on. Absolutely, it cannot go on. The point of now, though, is, if you like to use another cliche, I think Heathrow is in the last chance saloon as far as this council is concerned. We have put the representations, the very strong representations from Colin Kemp, supported by the Select Committee, to Heathrow. The 10 issues that Colin had identified, for which Heathrow have given virtually no satisfactory answers thus far, must mark that final line in the sand. But we have to give, at this 23rd hour, 59th minute, the ability for Heathrow to respond. There's no point in putting all these representations and saying, oh, it doesn't matter what you say, we're still going to oppose you. Let us wait, maybe not for very long, until Heathrow come back to us with hopefully some satisfactory propositions. I put on one side the rail access route, which is one for the government, and which is also a no compromise. But until we get that, maybe moving to Mr. Evans's opposition at this stage is premature. Let's wait for a little longer, get a response from Heathrow, and then decide.
Mrs. Clack.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I have huge sympathies with your residents because I live at the other end of the county, and my residents are facing a DCO for Gatwick expansion to 73 million passengers per annum. And I have been in this council long enough to know as well that we have always been under the pressure of airport expansion, sandwiched as we are. And no one has ever given a thought to how our residents are going to be able to cope with either expansion at Heathrow or at Gatwick. I'm talking about our minor roads. For example, in the village of Charlwood, where I live, we had a traffic survey that showed that we had 56,000 vehicle movements a week in a village of 900 homes, all funneled to go to Gatwick. So I have huge sympathy with your motion and everything that you've said. But what I find difficult to support, Councillor Evans, is that you're asking us to suspend our unqualified support for Heathrow expansion. And as far as I'm aware, and I've been in this council since 2001, we have never had unqualified support for expansion of either airport. You quote in your notes the very hard-fought policy of July 2013, which I think replaced the policy, not hugely changed, of 2008, of making sure that this county council would never support expansion of airports without proper introduction and of the right infrastructure to support that. And I believe that you cannot easily find that infrastructure support unless you introduce things like railways and new smart motorways. People will still want to come through our villages and villages will still be affected by all these issues. So I would very much like to support your motion, but I can't because I don't believe that this council has unqualified support for Heathrow. If you could change that, Mr. Evans, I would be most grateful. And the other point that I'd like to make about your motion is about the judicial review, because I believe that's already passed, and I don't see how the county can add to that. But I would like to support your motion if you could make an amendment to the to item 1 and remove paragraph 3. Then I think I would like to support it. And I do believe that we've had, as I say, lots of support for making sure that airports are held to account in the way that they expand in this county. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I get to my main point, I would like to think that I could thank Mr Evans for going to Brussels to support the British government's attempt to reach agreement with Europe. And I noticed, by the sound of it, you went by airplane. I believe there's a very good train service going there. Was it cancelled? That's absolutely fine. Thanks. I think it's one to you, not to me. In your comment, Mr Evans, you talked about Farnham, Guildford, Woking. You bypassed Surrey Heath. It's a little bit like Heathrow Airports Limited. They bypassed Surrey Heath on their proposal. They're happy to fly over us, but they don't want to put in that transport link. At the seminar here, and when they came to Camberley, they talked about it, we pushed them, and all we got from them is not our problem, Gov. Yes, it is their problem, it's their airport, they should be putting in proper links coming in from places like Camberley, where a lot of people work, a lot of people live, travel into Heathrow, and they should have a proper service. We can catch a bus, we can go to Guildford, catch a bus, terrific. It gets down to the junction of the A3 and M25. Good night, Vienna. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Forster.
Thank you, Chairman. The Lib Dem Group and I do not support Heathrow expansion, and we've opposed the principle of expansion from day one. We think it's an expensive folly, causes environmental damage if it went ahead, and completely goes against our carbon emissions commitments. Now, I appreciate some members have not always taken we don't like the principle of expansion, but I think members are gradually becoming to our way of thinking that you can't actually mitigate against the damage that would be caused by Heathrow expanding. It's just not possible. Promises have been broken time and time again, as has been stated by the Cabinet member, and it's very difficult to build that trust up to go, well, actually, if this goes ahead, it will be mitigated because of this. Some of the key challenges that we talk about in this chamber are high cost of housing, which affect our residents and council staff, and road congestion. Heathrow will make those issues so much worse. No mitigation plans, even if they were improved tenfold that Heathrow have talked about, will make those problems stay the same, let alone not get worse. I want to talk particularly about the train situation as it goes through my town and my division of Woking, and as a regular commuter. Now, I think we need Southern Rail access. That is important. But Heathrow hasn't proposed to do that. It's not linked to their expansion at all. But even if they did start to get out their checkbook to say, yes, we might run a couple of trains through, it could take away, and it probably would take capacity away from the current lines from Guildford, Woking, etc., up to London. They would happily sacrifice my residents that have moved to Woking to commute to London so that they can get a train service to Heathrow on the cheap. We cannot have a Southern Rail access to Heathrow without proper investment in our railway. And if Heathrow is not willing to do that, the Southern Rail access is dead and their plans will not go ahead. We need to be very clear about that. That is one of the reasons why AirTrack 10, 15 years ago failed, and we haven't solved that problem. The idea of Southern Rail access is brilliant. I just don't believe Heathrow or the government will fund it, which is why we should be very clear and oppose expansion straight away. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Two more speakers before I call the proposer and seconder. Mr. Mansfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel that a lot of what I wanted to say has already actually been stated. I'm basically standing up supporting my local community, my local villages within Surrey Heath. I'm not against expansion and development, and whatever source it is. My concern is that with Heathrow, when they came out, I attended many of the roadshows here and also out in the community. Whenever the actual accessibility was raised, it was very dismissive by the Heathrow team, in my view. I come from this at a slightly different angle. I spent 23 years of my professional life, working for our national flag carrier, fortunately flying all over the world. And one of the slight ironies we always had was when we got back to Heathrow, it was one of the most difficult places to connect back, for instance, to Surrey Heath. You could either do it on the rail air link, which is slightly daft, whereas wherever you were overseas, wherever it may be, Far Eastern places, etc., their connectivity was far better. And it's really a great shame. And this really hasn't been looked at, in my view, appropriately, with a commitment to giving a proper infrastructure for the future. And I think until that is received, and I welcome the Cabinet member's reply about gaining the knowledge and the extra infrastructure before this is agreed to, because without it, it to me is a non-runner.
Thank you. Mr. Mallet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Goodman and Mrs. Clack made clear about the qualification. I did write to Mr. Evans when I saw this and said, well, even your own report at the bottom of the page with all the stuff on it does say that Surrey County Council had a qualified situation, and I did ask him to amend it, but he's ignored it. However, though anybody who wants some assurance on this, my MP Dominic Raab has assured me there'd be no increase in road traffic or otherwise if Heathrow's expanding. If you dispute that, have a look at his past blogs and you'll see it written there. However, what I'd really like to say is I am still appalled by the dogged support of this council for Heathrow expansion. Around the world, new airports are being built outside main areas. Monorails and other facilities to get in and out of those places are being built. The right place for this airport is of course, in the Thames Estuary, as Boris Johnson previously promoted. What I would say is the day a plane drops on a row of houses in Putney, Heathrow will be finished. Anyway, I mean, it really is time that we actually, as far as I'm concerned, took a different attitude to this. The support that Surrey gives this airport expansion seems to be based on the fact that some 10,000 people from Surrey are employed there. That seems to say that if the airport closed, Heathrow area would become a desert. Well, imagine the sort of scrabble for developers and all sorts of new town and new facilities and everything else that would actually happen on that very, very big site if the airport was moved. The economy would greatly benefit if we had an airport in the estuary. All kinds of new design, even from accountancy systems to light systems to every other system, would have to be designed, and these would be saleable worldwide. I mean, really, this airport and such airports as Heathrow, but in the centre of populations, are not sustainable. I've made this point every time they've come here to give us an exposition. I've made it at any meeting I've been to, but still it carries on. And of course, Malin is at work here. There's a very big organisation determined to see Heathrow expand at any price, at any terms, under any conditions, and I'm quite sure perhaps in some way that short of government really having a change of mind, that is going to happen. But I do question whether we, as Surrey County Council, should be part of this support. Thank you.
Finally, Mr. Bottom.
Chairman, I think it would be wonderful if we could agree this motion unanimously, and I wonder if it's too late for me to propose the amendment to remove the words suspend its unqualified support for Heathrow expansion and the third paragraph, because if we could agree the motion unanimously on that basis, I would like to move that amendment, Chairman.
Mr. Bond, do you have a seconder?
Yes, please.
Right, Mr. Harmer. I'll go back now to the proposer to see if he's prepared to proceed in that manner.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, could you clarify what am I responding to the whole thing or just to that amendment?
Yes, will you accept the amendment as proposed by Mr. Bottom?
Well, I was going to suggest almost to when Councillor Mrs Clack was querying about it, I was going to suggest deleting the "un" bit to suspend its qualified support for Heathrow expansion. But if Councillor Bottom, am I correct, is suggesting removing the whole of paragraph 1 and paragraph 3?
No.
The first sentence, the first line of point 1.
Meetings,
to seat the meeting, okay, and because of the judicial review being in abeyance,
take it out.
I'm prepared to accept Councillor Bottom's amendment, and then I'm sure the Council will fully be able to support it, because that would be in line with everything that's been said.
Right. Mr Bottom, would you be agreeable to that?
I'm delighted, Chairman. That seems to me a wise and attractive counsel.
Right, so in that circumstance, then, Mr Hughes, could you clarify the amended motion, please?
Chairman, would it be possible to have 5 minutes just to consider the...
That's just what I've asked. We have 5-minute adjournment. Thank you. As we've heard, has prepared an amendment to delete the first line of point 1 and to delete the third point. Mr Evans, do you accept this amendment? Thank you. Now, we can debate the amendment, but I've got the leader. I'll take first on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm not sure you want to delete the whole of the first sentence of the first line. Well, this council therefore agrees to seat meetings.
That's correct.
So, and then the rest of that paragraph, which we will support, because that absolutely goes to the heart of the debate. Chairman, though, we can't agree the second recommendation, and I'd ask you to take a separate vote on that, and the third one's being deleted.
That's fine, Leader. Thank you. So if there's no more debate, I'll go to Jonathan Essex as the seconder to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll speak very briefly on the first part, so it seems we are in agreement on that one. I mean, this motion is asking for the council to be bolder. We've talked about farce, we've talked about charade. There's no good doing what Heathrow wants. What they want to do is to build a runway first and then wait for others to pay for things like transport links later. Our letter to Heathrow is sort of pandering towards that, suggesting 600,000, let me quote, air traffic movements a year. There should be a condition on the DCO that no more than 600,000 ATMs per annum should be allowed until both the Western and Southern rail schemes are in place. What that means is 120,000 flights a year can occur before we have the public transport there. We've debated today, Mike Goodman has said he wants it prior. So I take his word that we need to be stronger than in the letter that he said to Heathrow. We actually want to have it before. There's no point, building a new development and then providing the school places 10 years later. There's no point letting congestion get worse before public transport comes in. That would gridlock Surrey. But let's move on. It sounds like we're all on the same page on that. Since October 2018, when this was last debated, we have declared a climate emergency almost unanimously here in Surrey. On Heathrow, our current policy is still to wait. The Government's Committee on Climate Change has said a similar thing. What it said is, we think we can do it, but we're not quite sure. But it has called on the Government to halve its aviation growth plans. So something needs to change. And we need a position on what we're going to do on big carbon emitters in Surrey, in our economic sphere of influence. What about Gatwick? What about Heathrow? What about oil and gas drilling on our countryside? We can gather together and talk about what the Council should do. We also need to take a position on what's going to have the biggest impact, either driving us one way or perhaps cycling, walking and taking the bus in the other direction. We can, like Pontius Pilate, sit on the fence, saying on the one hand this and on the other hand that. If you put both hands and you sit on them, then you're pretty much sitting on your hands. Constructive ambiguity, fudge. We need to actually say what we mean. This second part is very straightforward. It simply says that expanding the fastest growing cause of climate change is not consistent with dealing with climate change. That's all it says. It's not difficult to accept that. You know, those under the flight path, the youth strikers, we need to speak truth to power. We can't have this sort of, being nice to Heathrow Airport. We've actually got to stand up for our residents. We've got to stand up for the future. And we've called a climate emergency. All this motion does is ask us to reflect it in our position on Heathrow Airport, so we don't have constructive ambiguity in this council on climate change, just like the government's had this last 3 years spent on Brexit. Let's be clear, an emergency isn't about waiting for longer, it's about taking action. Please, let's move forward on this issue together, as we've already agreed that that's what we want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Essex. Mr. Evans.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I thank Councillor Goodman for the conversations we've had during the week and for giving his speech in seconding my motion, which is what I interpret it was, although the bizarre twist at the end when he said he was going to propose voting against it. And I'd like to thank Councillor Forster for his supportive remarks as well. Just to echo and add some extra weight to what Councillor Essex has just said, in one of the meetings with Heathrow Airport on their roadshow, when I challenged the representative about the lack of rail links, his words were, and I paraphrase, was, let's get the third runway built first and then we can start thinking about rail links. We are committed to them, but let's get one thing done at a time. And colleagues, we can't do that because the disruption, if the third runway gets the go-ahead, and that is all still somewhat debatable, but we cannot say we're sitting on the fence. We cannot be ambiguous about whether we want rail links through Surrey Heath, and I could then run through, add all the other 10 boroughs and districts of Surrey and associated areas around Heathrow Airport. We need better public transport links so that we get cars off the road, which will address climate change as well. So the amendments have been put forward, and I urge colleagues to accept all of it now in its entirety, and we can go forward and send a strong message to the government. And the government may not be strong and may not be lasting very long, but let's send a message to them anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. So we'll go to the vote, and I'll take the two paragraphs separately. So paragraph 1, all those in favour, please press and raise a hand. Against? Abstentions? That's carried unanimous. Paragraph 2, all those in favour, press and raise their hand. Thank you. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That is lost. So the first paragraph is carried, second paragraph is lost. Thank you. Turning to the third motion, standing in the name of Mr. Tim Hall. Members, I understand Mr. Hall wishes to withdraw this motion. Is that correct, Mr. Hall?
Yes, we're happy to withdraw it at the time and everything else.
Thank you. So, moving to item 10, appointment of the Independent Remuneration Panel, page 39 of the agenda. To approve the appointment of the Independent Remuneration Panel and its terms of reference, I call the leader to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chairman. This following resignation of a member of the panel, the role was advertised and interviewed 3 shortlisted candidates, and Steve Banks, a former Metropolitan Police officer and an experienced school governor, was appointed. So the recommendation is to approve the 3 panel members and also the draft terms of reference which come to Council. The panel will sit over the next few months, and any recommendations from their review will come to Council in 2020.
Thank you. So the recommendation is on page 40 of your agenda. Is this agreed? Thank you. Item 11, appointment of the local committee vice chairman. I call the leader to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chairman. As you're aware, Councillor Banks is no longer a member of the Conservative Group, so the proposal is to appoint Rachel Lake as vice chairman of the Elmwich Local Committee.
Mr. Bennison.
Bear with me just a little bit. I feel like I'm not actually stopping at Rachel Lake getting it. What I'm actually saying is I feel like when airplane because you could go to the loo. Just a little bit of history, and because I'm coming back only a little bit, because what I'm saying is the first thing I knew about this, I did not get the green paper or the green book in the post, and I had to get one late yesterday. And that's the first time I've read that I'm being stepped over. And I would have thought the chairman would have at least turned around and said, Mike has had 15 years on the local committee. He's done a wonderful job, and we're now replacing him, and I'm not disputing, with Rachel Lake, although I don't understand why John O'Reilly, who was the original one,
Mr. Bennison, can we conclude the remarks, please? Thank you.
Under this, what I'm turning around to say is, under this council's constitution, fairness, respect and equality and compassion was mentioned here. I think somebody, and the reason I'm sitting here comes into this as well, nobody has communicated anything with me. And just to turn around and say, you're dumped, or whatever expression you want to use of it, does not go with fairness, respect and equality. And I just wish to say that I won't be voting. I have no problem with it going somewhere else, but somebody could have the decency to tell me and communicate with me, because they are not communicating from that side of the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Bennison. Thank you for your comments. So the recommendation is that Rachel Lake is duly elected as the Vice Chairman of the Elmbridge Local Committee for 2019-20. Are we agreed? Thank you. Item 12, updates to the Constitution. I call upon the Leader to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report seeks Council's approval for the increase of delegated authority thresholds from 500,000 to 1 million, but it also informs Council's decisions that I took on the 3rd of September, which are set out on the papers. I recognise and respect Councillor Bond's earlier comment about making sure that any changes to the Constitution are clearly articulated, and we'll make sure that happens in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Kington.
I'm referring to the information on page 46, which is the increase in the Council's financial key decision threshold. And I note that the report states that most county authorities have adopted the $500,000 or $1 million as a threshold for key decisions. And it does worry me that the rationale for this Council adopting the $1 million threshold is the requirement to take decisions at an increasing pace. Firstly, I'm surprised that a decision relating to £1 million is so sudden that it needs to be taken urgently and without greater consideration. But secondly, the track record of this Council on service provision and value for money verdicts does not suggest that this is the right time to make this move. If the Council supports this change, and I'm not inclined so to do, will Councillor Oliver agree to submit to the relevant scrutiny committee at the end of the financial year a report showing how many times this process was used above the current $500,000 threshold, as well as the rationale for so doing?
Thank you. No others? Leader, could you respond, please?
Don't imagine that these decisions are taken in isolation from the relevant cabinet member. They aren't. So I think in principle I'm happy that we provide at the end of each year to the Audit Committee a list of decisions that have been taken at that threshold level, yes.
Thank you, Leader. I think that's very reasonable. So the recommendations are on page 48 of your agenda. Are we agreed? Thank you. Item 13, changes to Cabinet portfolios, page 75 of your agenda. I call the Leader of the Council to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, as I previously advised Council, there have been some changes to the Cabinet members. So can I thank Cameron McIntosh and Wyatt Ramsdale for their contribution over the last few months, and indeed look forward to their continuing contribution on various projects as they remain closely involved with them. Mark Newty has joined as a Deputy Cabinet member, at the moment without a specific portfolio, but is assisting various Cabinet members on certain projects. The intention of the review of the portfolios was to balance out some of the workload across the Cabinet members, and in particular to enable Mike Goodman to have more time to focus on the sort of climate issues and the Environment Commission work. So you'll see there's just been a slight rejigging of those portfolios.
Cabinet portfolios. Are we agreed? Thank you. Item 14, the report of the Cabinet on page 77 of the agenda. I call the Leader of the Council to present the report of the meetings of the Cabinet held on 16th July and 24th September 2019. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move the reports of the Cabinet held on the 16th of July and 24th of September 2019.
Thank you. I'll call the paragraphs as they are. There's quite a few. Paragraph A. There's a recommendation that Council adopts the revised Statement of Community Involvement as attached as Annex A. Are we agreed? Thank you. Then I'll call paragraphs B to J in their entirety and ask if anyone's got any questions. Yes, Mr. Evans.
Just on paragraph I to do with Heathrow expansion, can the Leader give us an assurance that if and when a response is given by Heathrow Airport Limited, it will be shared with the Council?
Indeed.
There have been 2 urgent decisions in this quarter. Are we agreed? Thank you. And the motion is that the report of the meetings of the Cabinet held on 16th July and 24th September 2019 be adopted. Are we agreed? Item 15. No notification of a question on the minutes have been received. Meeting ends at 12:35.